One. Hello, everybody. My name is Spencer Havronic, and welcome to the Socially Distant Untitled podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about space as it relates to movies. Today, I'm joined by...
I'm Christos Kaidonius.
And I'm Dominic Zeman.
And today, we're the Guinea Force. Anyways,
Identity theft ain't a joke, Christos.
No, but you are, Spencer.
Ouch.
So today, it isn't just the two usual idiots, Dominic and I. We are joined by our
smart one for once. I'm smart.
Our resident...
Smart idiot.
God! Our resident space...
I beat you to it.
our resident space expert, Spencer. He's been into space before. He was just on the shuttle that went to the space station.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I just got back.
Celebration of the success.
He's FaceTiming us right now from the space station, actually.
Yeah, yep. This is the American module.
American module.
As you could tell.
As long as it's not a work module. Because
Yeah.
So yes, today we're going to be talking about movies about space. We're going to do the usual where we take turns recommending movies, and we tell you where you can find them. Spencer, because these are guests, actually came with 2 movies today. And then we're going to talk about everyone's favorite prompt section, where we have a very special prompt relating to movies and space. And we're just going to discuss, what it means,
100%.
what it do. Maybe a little Jesus, kind of bring religion back into the scientific discussion,
Are we?
Before we start, can I just say shout out my man's Elon Musk for putting a man in space.
And for donating to the podcast.
Well, since when is putting a man in space a phrase? He put 2 men in space. No one's ever heard of that phrase before.
Thank you everyone for tuning into the Untitled podcast.
Well, you see, Spencer's already correcting us on our knowledge about space facts.
Yeah. That's what I'm here for. That's my job.
Spencer is such a special guest. We're going to have our first movie recommendation from Dominic Zeman. Dominic.
Damn.
Which actually...
Yeah, start. Would you like to talk about the movie that you brought?
Yes. I'd love to talk about my movie. First show and tell in 2nd grade. So I'll be talking about the movie The Martian.
Dominic,
all right.
Okay, we're coming back in. Dominic, what is your movie? Because we definitely didn't have technological issues in between me forgetting to get an image and then forgetting to make my phone a host, and then also being just the biggest brain.
I think everyone knows what the movie is now that you put it on the screen.
Spencer, shut up!
Let us have a moment, okay? So for the 3rd time, the movie I'm talking about is The Martian. Oh God. So why I chose this movie for space is, though it's technically not set in space, it's set on Mars. Partially.
That's technically everything's in space, but okay, we're defining space as something not on Earth.
So the Notebook is in space, Christos. You want to talk about the...
I've never seen the Notebook.
Neither have I. It's just it's a joke.
Spencer,
Anyways,
how would you define space?
I think
space starts at...
Spencer, where does space start?
Hey, no, don't mute me again. I will destroy you. Space starts at the carbon line, which is 100 kilometers above the ground, or 60 miles above the ground. So that's technically where space starts. Although you can just consider that we're all in space because Earth is in space. So, yeah. Okay. But Mars would be in space. I agree with that.
Okay. So... 4th time again, I'll be talking about Martian, movie set on Mars about with starring Matt Damon, about bringing a guy from Mars to Earth. Simple premise, set off of a book by Andy Weir, his most famous book, also very well known for writing the short story The Egg. And why I chose this movie, because one, it's in space and I had to, And two, it talks about themes of, coming together as a community and like achieving a goal. The cast of this movie isn't purely, well, I'm not 100% sure if it's purely American, but I don't think it's purely American. And the characters in the movie are very diverse. Have people from all races or, genders and all, like a lot of nationalities coming together to get one man from Mars. And it's really cool to think about, especially with the context of, well, it's not cool that happened, but Ridley Scott, the director of the movie, his brother, before making this movie, had unfortunately committed suicide. And you can really see in this movie that though it is not about that, and though it is, about space exploration and being a sci-fi movie, it really points out the themes of loneliness and, coping with loss and being alone, literally alone on a planet and trying to cope with that. And this effort that even though you might feel you're alone, there's always people going to be there for you, and eventually, spoiler alert, they're gonna bring him home. So I think that's a really cool idea.
Okay. The Martian can be found on Hulu and Amazon Prime, I believe.
Yeah. Also has an amazing cast. So many of the actors were in Marvel movies too, in roles you wouldn't expect.
Matt Damon has been an extra in just, I want to say, like, definitely more than half of the Marvel movies, which is really funny.
Yeah. And then you have like Michael Pena, which is the Mexican sidekick in Ant-Man.
Oh.
And Donald Glover, which was in Spider-Man, either Homecoming or Far From Home. Benedict Wong, which was the sidekick for Doctor Strange.
So many sidekicks.
Yeah, I know, right? I was telling myself that too. Then there was, I can't pronounce that, Chiwetel Ejiofor, who played in Doctor Strange again. Then there was Jessica Chastain, which played in X-Men. And the last one that I looked up was Kate Mara, which also played in the Fantastic Four. So, a pretty Marvel-based cast.
Wow.
Yeah. And the two
Spencer?
lead roles.
Huh?
Oh, no, I was just going to say the two lead roles of this movie played in Interstellar the year after.
I have not seen this movie, but Spencer, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I liked that movie. It was realistic for the most part, but it really sort of it's a good projection of what we can expect in space exploration, in the future, maybe a few decades from now, and it has a lot of good messages about international collaboration, and it's really something that we've already seen. So it is pretty much based in reality, because we have the International Space Station, and countries collaborating to work in space is what we want. It's very hopeful for the future, and it's a good movie all around.
100%.
Once again, this movie can be found on Amazon Prime and Hulu. And during these uncertain times, it would be, escapism is a good thought. And what's more escape than actually the planet?
Yeah, and also you can sort of look at, through the lens of current events, with Matt Damon being stranded on Mars, as sort of like a social isolation quarantine type thing, sort of an examination of human psychology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it definitely is a sort of appropriate movie to watch now, I would say, especially with all this hype about space.
Shout out Elon Musk.
Anyway, before we continue, I need to bring this up. So our last video got copyright struck because we showed scenes from Lahane. So no more showing scenes from movies. We will be sticking with posters.
Yeah, because we're making big bucks off of these.
Dominic, I feel like you have to apologize to all of our fans for this indiscretion.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's your idea.
All your faults.
sit down and go like, figure out how to use the internets, as it's called by the millennials.
Jeez. Okay. Well, I guess I'll get better. Okay.
Good.
I just want to improve.
Good. I'll go next. So the movie that I will be talking about is Ace Ventura 3, Out of This World. No, I'm going to be talking about, again, another Ripley Scott movie, Alien. I feel like I don't really need to introduce this movie. This movie has been a classic ever since it came out, and really it's deserving of all the accolades it is given. This is a movie, even if you've seen it, I'd recommend rewatching as many times as possible because you'll always notice little things that are new about it. This movie is directorially beautiful, expertly shot, and really well made. The design behind the alien, I don't feel like the design behind the alien gets enough credit for what it's worth. I can't remember the designer's name off the top of my head, but he's known for making grotesque, sexually empowered designs. You can definitely tell by how phallic the alien head is. And it really adds to a lot of like motherhood symbolism into the movie. I don't mean to spoil anything, but there's something to be said. I don't really understand it myself about an alien with the head, the way that looks like being born, being raised, and then being thrown out of a starship called Mother. There's a lot of like different levels of symbolism there that quite frankly I don't understand, and I'd welcome anyone to even try to understand it. For how many years has it been? Around 40.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's an old movie, but it still looks better than a lot of movies that come out today.
Yeah.
Like it was a masterfully crafted movie. It is just such a beauty to look at. I don't think it can be given enough praise. It's really good at capturing suspense and fear because like even though like I've always enjoyed Alien. As a kid, I've never seen it up until very recently. But I always thought the design looked really cool. So going into the movie, I sort of knew what to expect. And yet, I was still stricken with fear throughout the movie. The later movies, like Alien vs. Predator, to be honest, any of the Predator movies, and any Alien movie after Alien 3 isn't all that great. I haven't seen all of them, so I can't really vouch for it. But this movie is a classic, and I would say is one of the top 100 movies of all time.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And what I think is really cool is the movie feels cool. Like when you have, and this might not be the case or though the other movies aren't as good, or subjectively aren't as good, they still feel cool. Like the idea of the alien and its design and everything, let's be honest, it's sick. It's awesome. Like it gives you this feeling like, dude, that's badass. Let's go kill these people or something, like go
What?
You also like realize how much of an effect this movie has on like the entire field of you kind of realize how impactful this movie was, right? Kind of what we talked about with Back to the Future. This movie wildly influenced the horror genre, sci-fi genre, everything really set into stone what it means to be an alien. I also feel like we need to give praise to the acting. Sigourney Weaver did an amazing job with her role. Every actor did a really good job, really.
She's basically the best strong female protagonist in almost any movie. Gotta be honest.
She did an amazing job, and even now, she's an adore to watch.
Yeah.
This movie, Alien, can be found on Hulu Plus. Not Hulu Plus, my bad. On Hulu and Amazon Prime.
Did you just mix Hulu and Amazon Prime into like?
No, it was Hulu and Disney Plus actually, because they're doing this partnership thing right now. I don't know. But yeah.
Hulu has live sports.
Yes! Let me go watch some sport ball right now.
Yes, the balls with the sports, yes.
And the sticks and stuff.
And the bats, yes.
Okay.
Wait, not the bats.
So that's everything for Alien, really. Spencer, actually, being
Okay.
our guest, came with 2 movies. So, Spencer,
Yeah.
what are the movies that you will be talking about?
So the first movie I'm going to talk about is Apollo 13, and this is based on a true story. It's pretty historically accurate, in my opinion. It's made in 1995. It's based off of a book by Jim Lovell, who was one of the astronauts on Apollo 13. And if you're not familiar with the whole incident, it's Apollo 13 was a mission to the moon after Apollo 11, of course. And public interest was dying down. And 3 astronauts were going to the moon, Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert. And in the middle of their voyage, a part of their spacecraft exploded, and they had to get back home. They had to be resourceful and find their way back home. They couldn't land on the moon because of said explosion and their lives being in danger. But it just follows the story of what's going on, what happened, to a pretty accurate level, I would say. It does a good job of explaining all of orbital mechanics to the public, things like that. And it's got a pretty talented cast for the 3 astronauts. We got Tom Hanks, Bill Paxton, and Kevin Bacon. So we got a pretty big trio in that.
That's wild. Yeah, I haven't seen this movie personally, but I haven't heard much of the mission either. And it's really interesting, especially to think how, you think about what happened just recently with SpaceX launching, was it Falcon or Dragon?
Dragon.
Both.
Oh.
Falcon was the rocket, Dragon is the capsule.
Oh, okay. So, launching that rocket and launching it with these computers, and how this device has the power that the mission, the first mission to the moon had. This device has more power than all the computers used to send the man to the moon the first time. And that's insane to think about. And, how technology has evolved, and, this being, I presume, a massive part of the themes of the movie is technology.
This movie also seems to me, I haven't seen it, but it seems to talk about how really dangerous space travel is. Like, Spencer was telling me about the odds the other day, and he was like, Spencer, you can probably explain this better than I.
Yeah.
You said something like,
the odds of failure for the Apollo missions was about 1 in 10, and this was a failure, and it very well could have ended with the deaths of all 3 astronauts. But spoiler, I guess. I mean, it's not really a spoiler since it happened 50 years ago, so you already know how the movie's going to end. But all 3 astronauts are able to miraculously get back to Earth, despite the explosion on the spacecraft. You can beep it out. Don't be so lazy, Mr. Editor. But
whoa!
Oh, okay, Spence. I feel like that's a personal attack right there.
But yeah, they're able to skirt death and make it back. So it's a very inspiring tale, and it's a good warning for anyone who wants to become an astronaut that things can go wrong. And if you're going to space for the wrong reasons, if you're rushing to go to the moon, then it's not the safest thing you could do. It's best to take your time and be careful. Watch what's going on.
Russia won the space race. That's what I'm saying. CCCP rockets to the moon.
Literally, shut up. That is just so wrong.
No, it's not.
Who landed on the moon? Who landed on the moon?
Who landed on the moon? Huh?
Person
Who landed on the moon?
Space. First dog in space.
First dog? Oh, yes. Let me send my little dog to space. Why would you ever send a dog to space, huh?
It's not a sprint. It's a race.
It's a race.
You may have gotten a good lead, like a good 200-yard lead in the beginning, but then we caught up and overtook you by a long shot.
Yeah.
And Russia won the space race.
Who's saying getting a man on the moon was the mission? I think the most...
The Soviets had their own lunar program.
Their overlords at the time didn't land on the moon first.
The Soviets had their own lunar program. They were racing us to the moon.
Oh!
And eventually funding dropped.
I'm not trying to get political here. I'm just saying
That
I
you're back
think
if you're back.
Yes, you were. You just said
dogs
Russia
in
won,
space.
which is a
I
lie.
think satellites and dogs in space are way cooler. Way cooler.
Would you rather get a dog in space or a man on the moon? What?
Yes.
Small-brained infidel. That's what I call it.
Tiger Laika, you will forever be remembered.
Yeah, rest in
Wait,
peace,
did
Laika.
the dog die in space?
Yeah, no. She died like when she got back, I think. Wait,
Oh.
no, let me look this up. She died of overheating. I know that.
Yeah, I think it was on the way back.
Wait, so you gotta see? Okay. Like, you can't really say that you won the race then, because if you send a dog to space only for it to die, that's like speedrunning a video game, like, to die first.
It's, it's figuring out the mechanics, right?
Yeah, but figuring out doesn't sound like winning to me.
She was alive in space for a bit, at least. You know?
She died. Yeah, she died in space.
She died in space? How is that a victory? You sent something to space only to get fried like McDonald's.
That's really messed up. That's really
Even then,
messed
like,
up.
who won the Cold War? Like,
The one who didn't go bankrupt
and
collapse.
he has a point. He has a point. I'm just saying, y'all in debt. That's all I gotta say.
money doesn't
It
exist.
doesn't matter if we're in debt. If America's like trillions of dollars in debt, it doesn't matter.
Money
It's not gonna
doesn't
get paid
exist.
off. So
All right,
what?
let's not get
Spencer,
political.
what's your second movie?
Okay, all right. This was really off topic. My second movie is Interstellar, directed by Christopher Nolan, released in 2014. It's a pretty well-known movie. I don't need to say a lot about it other than it's pretty good. It gets a lot of the science right, even though there's some parts of it that are a bit inaccurate. A lot like physicists worked on this. Kip Thorne, who's a famous physicist who worked with Stephen Hawking, who's more well known than him. Sorry, Kip Thorne, but he was a very big part of writing the screenplay for Interstellar, and he actually came up with a very accurate simulation. Well, no, the movie came up with a very accurate simulation of a black hole, like a very accurate visualization of it, by using Kip Thorne's equations in his notebook. And a lot of physicists were just blown away by their representation and the cinematography, the depiction of the black hole. So it's a pretty good movie. A lot of talented actors working on it. And do I need to say any more? Do I need to say more?
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed this movie too. I saw it when it came out in the cinemas. I haven't rewatched it recently, but I've rewatched it once before, and it's once again a really cool movie about space travel and loss in a sense. You know, it works with time and how time moves in different like at different rates in different places in space, and you know the idea of like becoming younger than your daughter and stuff like that. And I think that's a really cool part of it. And wait, I forgot, and I'm embarrassed. What's the main actor? What's the lead role?
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey does an incredible job acting, and I think that one of the scenes of him crying listening to his daughter is an amazing scene. It portrays his loss and his emotions so well. I think like any Instagram about like movies you go on, that's like every fifth post. It was an incredible job, and I think the like research behind it and the work that was put into that movie, you know, with the poetry that was in it and stuff like that. You know, what's the poem? Don't go gentle into that good night. You know, all of that. It just comes together into this immaculate movie.
That's really weird to think about Matthew McConaughey being like really good in a sci-fi film, considering that he's like an anti-vaxxer.
Is he actually?
Yeah, he doesn't. I don't think he even believes in space. Like, he is like really into that conspiracy stuff.
Oh God.
Oh man. Why? Why? It bothers me. But
political out here.
I mean, because this movie,
What? Politics, yes. Vaccines.
Yes, science, exactly the same thing as politics. But this movie is basically dealing with the consequences of climate change. Like the whole plot is driven around that Earth is screwed over because no one took action regarding climate change. The Earth warms up and people are starving. So in order to save humanity, they have to go interstellar. They have to go to other star systems, sort of seed human life so that we don't go extinct, sort of a last-ditch effort.
All they can eat is corn in the movie. It's like
Yeah.
either five.
Hey, I'll have you know, like, the majority of the U.S. economy is based on corn, okay? It actually kind of is.
Highly saturated corn syrup. No, high fructose corn syrup. Let's go.
Corn! Mother corn!
We praise the corn.
So Interstellar can be found again on Amazon Prime and Hulu.
Where can Apollo 13 be found on again? I didn't check.
I believe
because
that
I'm
was
just
going
that
on.
kind of guest.
Okay. Any final thoughts, or are we gonna move on to the prompt zone?
I think it's prompt zone time.
Don't tell me when it's prompt zone time. I'll tell you.
That sounded very cringe. I apologize. That was really painful when in hindsight.
You should. You need to apologize.
So today, our prompt for the prompt zone is, what is the point of space? Now, let me explain this incredibly vague prompt. So, last podcast, we talked about if we were a director, what symbols would we use in a movie? So we're going to talk about what directors or people working on movies represent by utilizing space. What does space mean for movies? For example, as we talked about, space conveys themes of isolation, themes of fear, not opposite of trust, mistrust. So what is the point of space? It's open for discussion. What would you guys say is the point
Space
of
is cold.
It's cold. Emotionally, physically, metaphorically, symbolically cold.
Yeah, it's cold in every way imaginable. That's my
Isn't
position.
in that
Thank
way
you very much.
warm as well? I mean, if there wasn't space, there would be no Earth, there wouldn't be life, there wouldn't be anything.
Like without fear, there wouldn't be happiness.
True.
Two sides of the same coin.
Two sides of the coin. So personally, what I think space is used for in movies is, well, at least so far, because we as humanity haven't gone far enough to really explore any percentage of space. We've just been to the moon and kind of back. So I think we don't know too much about space. And I'd put money on the fact that humanity doesn't really know much about space.
Perhaps we don't know all that much about space.
Yeah, space is sort of like the unknown. It's the final frontier. Star Trek guy.
So,
that being
like
said,
me.
though, we technically don't we know more about the surface of the moon than we do the bottom of the ocean?
yeah, we do.
Yeah, because we could see the surface of the moon like every night, but we'd have to dive down.
You have to be a critically acclaimed movie director to go down to the bottom.
Yeah,
Perhaps
James Cameron.
Every night.
Or you need to be a Microsoft billionaire.
Yeah, but no, I think since we don't know much about it, it still represents fear. And like the movies we talked about, Alien, Martian, Apollo 13, and Interstellar, are all in some ways about something going wrong in space and it turning out to be catastrophic until someone comes and saves everyone. It's this in a sense like, oh, dang, we're all going to die because space. And then, whoa, it has an optimistic ending. I think it's really like a scare factor with an optimistic outlook. Like when you see it in movies, it's usually in the horror genre or, sci-fi, because of course, but like it usually has a grim tone. Can you name one movie about space that was a comedy? Well, besides Space Jam.
Space Force.
What would you say, Spence?
Space Force. That's gonna be a comedy.
Spaceballs.
Oh yeah, Spaceball. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a funny one.
So basically, Dominic, when you're saying that, I completely agree. In every movie about space, something goes wrong unless something goes wrong, or else there wouldn't be a movie. I was going to say Star Wars, but when you think about it, it's this whole battle between what's the best way to lead a life, between the dark side and the light side. Right? Like every time you deal with space, something has to go wrong. But as you said, everything ultimately ends up brighter in the end, which sort of reflects. Spencer brought this up with Apollo 13. How space travel can be incredibly scary, and yet the goal that we reach for is always going to be good. It's going to be golden. It's a battle worth fighting.
We progress humanity.
Star Trek is definitely one that sort of exemplifies a lot of what you're saying, because it is us in the future, and humanity sort of matured a lot more. It's very hopeful, but it also illustrates how dangerous space is, because in every episode something goes horribly wrong and everyone's at risk, and it's up to the main characters and the ship and crew to save the day and make sure everything stays okay. So it basically exemplifies what you just said.
Bringing up Star Trek brings up what I think another point of using space is. A common thing that we talk about on this podcast is the more disconnected you are from something, the easier it is to stop, look at it, and analyze it. There was one time I was talking with Spencer, and I was trying to recommend to him a show that he should watch, because I thought when he likes, I've never seen Star Trek, and I thought when he said that he liked Star Trek, he liked the government, like the regulation behind it. He said, no, what I enjoy is the philosophical debates that each episode curtails. So I think what space does is that it's so disconnected from Earth and everything that happens here that you can completely disconnect yourself from it and have really interesting philosophical debates about life in general. I think space brings up
like that.
Yeah, space allows for, like you guys said, space is very cold, and yet it's also very warm. It brings a lot of philosophical debates that you can just see more clearly from space.
And I think that's why, like, with sci-fi, it's easier to illustrate. Like, it's hard to think of a sci-fi movie that doesn't have a deeper message. Like
unless it's a spoof. But even then, when you spoof something, you capture a little bit of the magic that he's going for.
It's I don't know, like, just name a movie, like, Ripley Scott's. I keep on getting that wrong. With Alien, how you said it represents like motherhood and interest, like.
Well, that's just one. But but that's a perfect example of how philosophy can be viewed from space.
And that's really interesting idea in philosophy, is like deriving the consciousness, with like what Sigmund Freud said with the ego and the id. You can't really you can't derive your consciousness and look at yourself in an objective sense, because you're always going to be subjective in some way. And that's what you said, Christos, is we don't know enough about space to be subjective. There's a lot of unknowns. So whatever whatever movie we make in space, it could be completely feasible. Like it's such a vast, space that
It's just big.
A vast space. Space is a vast space.
That massive.
Yeah.
Cowboys in the other side of the universe.
Yeah, we'd have no way of knowing.
Yeah, that's scary. That's a scary thing. Knowing that humanity will never be able to explore it.
You don't know that. Eventually, some great dude is gonna come up and go like, check this out.
Here we go. And let me just tinker around. Boom, warp drive invented.
It's like we create AI, boom, solves all our problems for us. All of a sudden, it's Westworld, but in space.
So that actually that brings me to my next point. I mentioned spoofs earlier, but now that I think about it, comedies about space tend to also be the most philosophical in a way. So two shows that immediately come to mind are Futurama and I hate to say it,
Rick and Morty.
Rick and Morty. I don't know if you can see right now, but before this, I actually was watching Rick and Morty. But Futurama has the writers of Futurama have like 27 years of Harvard education between them, but that's besides the point. Typically, it's just like The Simpsons' funny antics. Haha, robot drinks himself to death. How funny. But a lot of the times, it actually does deal with really interesting philosophical debates. One episode, they argue between creationism and evolution. And in the end, they kind of solve both by having like some dude created a robot that kept evolving and ended up creating a civilization on a planet. I always thought that was a really interesting episode. They handle a lot of stuff like that. Rick and Morty, of course, no one can turn themselves into a pickle that we know of. But honestly, it does bring up some really interesting ideas about what is real and what is not real. There's a lot of episodes dealing with simulations, and I'm just watching the 4th season right now. And there's this one episode where they're stuck on this thing called the continuity train, when it deals with a ton of different realities. And then you start realizing that every episode after it deals with, it features little symbols from that episode. And you start to think, well, what is real and what is not real? What is a different continuity? What is the main continuity? What's canon? What's meta-canon? What's going on? You actually see, in 2 episodes, you see Rick fist fight Dan Harmon, the creator of the show. In another episode, you see him fist fight God. It's like, what is going on? It's really interesting. It's really interesting. Again, the more disconnected you are from something, the easier it is for you to analyze it.
Yeah, and I think that's since you mentioned fighting gods, so you've seen the last one. The one with the acid of vat of acid, right? That one's really cool to think about too, because it's like, what is real? You know, like you didn't time travel, you perceived Morty. You killed yourself.
If time travel were to exist in our reality, it would be not actually time travel, it would be just going to a different point in space where, because if space is infinite, then everything's happening maybe 10 seconds before what we're doing. It would just be transferring to there.
Interesting idea.
Right, so actual time travel would be just space travel.
What do you think about Rick and Morty, Spencer?
Spencer, do you have a high enough IQ to watch Rick and Morty?
I've never watched it.
What?
I've never seen it.
What?
No,
yeah,
I haven't seen it
personally. Rick and Morty's pretty good.
I mean, yeah, it's sort of on my infinitely long list of stuff that I'd like to watch eventually, but I haven't seen it, so I don't have a lot to add. Other than I've turned myself into a pickle.
When Spencer and I were watching Back to the Future, every 20 seconds, we would just go, Marty, I turned myself into a pickle, Marty! Get in the DeLorean, Marty!
Let me tell you, there was this science guy, turned himself into a pickle. It was the
It's Bill Nye, huh?
Funniest stuff.
Am I the pickle? Pickle Nye.
Yeah. Now that we're sort of devolving into a discussion about pickles, is there anything that anyone would like to add?
Pickles are great on sandwiches.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into this episode of the Socially Distant Untitled Podcast.
If you're still watching it, God knows why you would. Thank you.
Spencer, thank you for tuning into this episode.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being our space expert.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun.
Oh, and yeah, I'm Dominic, that wherever Christos is in the red hood.
High five.
Spencer. High five? Wait.
What? Shoot.
Dominic, other way. Okay. Now, Spencer,
cut this.
Go that way with the fist bump. All right. And now, as we do, the next episode of the podcast will be themed around